for joining another Valerian Space Ventures webinar. Today, we're joined by Tyler Bernstein, the co-founder and CEO of Xenopower, a company that Valerian likes quite a bit. We have it in our portfolio. This is the company that's building nuclear batteries that can go anywhere from the bottoms of the ocean into space. Uh, really incredible stuff. They've seen a lot of progress over this past year. Tyler, we're super excited you were able to come on. Maybe to get things kicked off, you could sort of walk us through the story of how Xeno came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, we are building nuclear batteries, which are boxes roughly the size of microwave ovens, where you take radioisotopes, material decaying and producing heat over long half-lives. You convert that heat into electricity. The end result is boxes the size of microwave ovens generate electricity for years at a time. And not a new technology. This is what NASA has used for all of our deep space spacecrafts. This is astronaut Alan Bean on Apollo 12 handling plutonium on the moon. The Air Force Navy have used these as well, largely in the 20th century to power maritime buoys and Arctic sensors. And today we are building them using really available, abundant nuclear waste products with contracts with NASA, Space Force, and Navy to begin developing and soon deploying these from the seabed to the lunar surface to really enable frontier operations. That is not where the story started, though. Originally we were out of Vanderbilt University down in Nashville, Tennessee, and we'll save the full story. But the original founding of Xeno was when a friend and I wrote a paper on building a nuclear-powered Boeing 777. And this was a school project of all school projects looking at decarbonizing the aviation industry. And we started working with a professor on this thorium molten salt reactor powered Boeing 777. And in the course of doing this, which is not a great idea for a lot of reasons, we ended up getting in touch with a graduate student at Vanderbilt who was looking at similar concepts, except instead of using a nuclear fission reactor, using a radioisotope power system or a nuclear battery, and instead of powering drones, or sorry, instead of powering a Boeing 777, powering drones. So we started looking at these nuclear battery powered drones that can stay in the air for a really long time. Got some funding from Vanderbilt and a National Science Foundation to dig into this. And, in the summer of 2018, we ended up moving to DC and talked to a couple hundred people through what's called the I-Corps program. And this is ranging from generals in the Air Force to executives at Boeing and Lockheed to representatives on the Hill. And first and foremost, recognize that once and for all, we just, maybe shouldn't mix nuclear material on aviation. But more broadly, stumbled upon this core thesis that became the foundation of Xeno to bring us where we are today, which is that in the wake of a nuclear power competition, the seabed, Arctic space, surface of the moon, and beyond are regions of growing geopolitics and competition, and frequently barren of reliable energy. And that if we could build nuclear batteries, this proven technology, but build in manners that they were more affordable and lightweight and scalable, that could have a lot of broad usability to really be the foundation of these frontier regions, again, from the seabed to the lunar surface to outer space and beyond.
Very nice. So we're seeing this revolution in the nuclear industry, and we see a lot of these small modular reactors, advanced reactors in the fission
Yeah.
space, and we see people talking about the fusion space. This is in kind of a category of its own. Explain really what goes into a nuclear battery, how it's created, like how big is this, and what can it
Yep.
really power?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we are seeing incredible excitement of nuclear across the board. A lot of the tailwinds being from the need for energy for data centers, but also a lot of it is coming from the government and this need for reliable energy for national security for these frontier regions. And again, seeing fusion, fission, radioisotopes. And yes, we are kind of this own sector. And, unlike fission, we don't have uranium, we don't have chain reactions. We just have passive material or just radioactive material that is passively decaying over long half-lives, hot rocks in a box that are just producing heat as they decay. And the initial material we use is called strontium-90. And strontium-90 is a half-life of 28.8 years. So for decades, this material is just slowly decaying and producing heat. We can then capture that heat, convert it into electricity. And again, we're building boxes that are the size of roughly your standard microwave oven. So, something that you can, hold in your hands. And um, with that, it is not generating the power output of fission reactors. We're not in the megawatt or certainly gigawatt range. We're talking small power. We're looking watts in the future, low kilowatts of electricity. So small amounts of power for really, really, really long time periods. And with that, when you look at the applications, I'd say that we're not looking at powering infrastructure. We're looking more at powering platforms. So in the maritime sector, this is powering distributed sensors on the seabed so that we can track Chinese submarines. This is powering autonomous undersea vehicles that can roam the ocean for years, protecting infrastructure in the seabed, such as seabed cables, or supporting new industries from deep sea mining. In the space sector, where we'll talk more about today, we're looking at powering satellites on orbit to increase their maneuverability, landers and rovers on the moon so they can survive the 2 weeks of darkness of the lunar night so we can have this persistent presence. So again, looking at powering more of platforms in these frontier regions where energy is a scarcity, and we can provide that persistent energy that enables distributed autonomous operations in these regions.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking, you know, in space, we have all these ideas of new ways to generate power. We're going to need more power. We're trying new things with solar panels. We're trying to get reactors up there. We're trying power beaming, and that's all great. And then, I think about that deep ocean, and I'm like, that's a completely different ballgame trying to get power down there. Yours is able to work in both of those. Uh, Explain like the whole landscape of where this is really can be applied. Like, could you put these in cars? I
Yeah.
have so many questions of just wondering, like, well, this seems like the everything battery. Like,
Yeah.
is this the end all be all for
Look,
batteries?
I'd say the longer term vision of where Zeno can be is absolutely providing reliable energy anywhere on or off Earth in a compact package. This could be used, buried under in your backyard, and your house could have energy for a decade. Use it for critical infrastructure, disaster relief scenarios, off-grid power. We've been asked a lot about the cars and Lime scooters, and from a physics standpoint, that could work, but traditional batteries work well in a lot of those applications. But more broadly, I mean, when you're looking at the use of this technology, there is a, does it generate enough electricity and does, the physics close? And the short answer for that is yes. And all of these regions from the seabed to the Arctic to the lunar surface to here in Washington, D.C. or Seattle or, elsewhere, you could use this technology. It generates reliable electricity independent of the sun anywhere you need it to be. The other question is, does this make sense compared to other energy systems? And right now, we are building quite an expensive energy source. And that's true for a lot of, first of a kind, early development technologies. So right now, we're focusing on markets where people aren't necessarily going to buy our technology because of the price of the energy that we're producing, but rather that we enable brand new things in regions where persistent energy simply doesn't exist today. So again, let's go to the lunar surface where, right now, we've had some pretty incredible landings of commercial companies on the moon over the past couple of years, Intuitive Machines, Firefly, and they land on the moon with solar power and batteries, and they survive during the 2 weeks of lightness called the lunar day. They then hit the 2 weeks of darkness called the lunar night, and they literally freeze to death. And they have no way to stay warm, no way to power themselves. So NASA's paying about $100 million for these landers to go to the moon, be there for a couple of days, and then freeze to death. Energy is the constraint to persistent operations. If we can deliver a small box that can generate heat and electricity independent of the sun, you can integrate it on this lunar lander, and you can now have spacecrafts that can stay on the lunar surface for years instead of days. And this is, not theoretical. As mentioned, this is something NASA's done historically with a really expensive material called plutonium-238, and we're doing with more really abundant nuclear waste materials, as mentioned. But something that China is actually doing today. China today has their Chang'e 4 lander and rover that's on the lunar surface that is operating 24/7, 365, powered by radioisotopes. Again, meanwhile, the US is sending solar powered spacecrafts to the moon. So that's a great example where, again, the reason that we have interest and contract with NASA and great partnerships with Blue Origin, Intuitive Machines, and others is not because this is the cheapest way to get electricity. It is the only way to have electricity and heat during the 2 weeks of darkness to enable this persistent presence. Very similar things on the bottom of the ocean where you have seabed sensors, autonomous platforms that just use traditional batteries that die after a couple of days or weeks. So they need to refuel, they need to recharge these, they need to replace them. Again, if you can drop this nuclear battery on the seabed, you have persistent energy for years to enable brand new things for the US government and commercial entities operating there. So again, in the near term, focusing on these real strategic markets where we enable new things for customers, but longer term vision of the company as we get to scale, driver power up, price down, again, is to compete in more of those competitive energy markets where people will still pay a premium for resiliency, again, critical infrastructure, off-grid power, disaster relief scenarios, and other applications.
Got it. And I want to sort of give you the stage right now. And what has Xena done so far? Can you talk about some of the milestones you've hit and where you're at today? Because this isn't a PowerPoint company. You guys have done some real things.
We have. We're at a really exciting point in the company today where we've actually built nuclear hardware and, built our first nuclear heat source, really proving this core technology works. We've secured our first large source of fuel from the Department of Energy, this big box of strontium-90. And again, given this is a waste product, it's a public-private partnership where we are technically disposing of this material for the Department of Energy, reducing this liability to repackage into fuel for our nuclear batteries. We have also some exciting news coming on some infrastructure that we're bringing in-house that will allow us to really scale up production that, we intend to get operational in the very near future. Excitingly as well, we have, over $60 million of really anchored development programs with the Pentagon and NASA to begin building these full-scale nuclear batteries for maritime and space environments. And today sit in a place where, this year we are going to operationalize this nuclear facility. Next year in 2027, we're targeting to deliver our first systems to customers on the seabed, on the lunar surface, really deploying this technology to provide real value to the US government, the commercial companies. And then in 2028, scale production to meet the growing pipeline that we have of government and commercial customers in these maritime and space environments. And of course, longer term, work to commercialize this more broadly in distributed energy markets. So again, not a PowerPoint company. We've built nuclear hardware. We have infrastructure, we have fuel, we have contracts, we have really aggressive schedules that we need to meet over the next 24 months to bring this technology truly into operational uses on the seabed, on the lunar surface, and elsewhere, which is an exciting place to be. An incredible amount of work, but we're in a place where we control our own destiny in a lot of fronts, which is a very exciting place to be for a startup.
Got it. And I'm sure you get a lot of demand from the government and commercial. Can you sort of walk us through, you know, how much is coming in from the government and commercial and defense and
Yep.
how that's been in the past and where you see that scaling to in the future? Is it government still going to want this, always going to want this, be your biggest customer? I could see a lot
Yep.
of commercial companies getting a lot out of this as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we do see the government being the biggest customer in the near term and really that beachhead market. The government is willing to invest in technologies like ours a lot earlier sometimes than the commercial ecosystem is willing to. They also are the ones that are really leading the way in these frontiers, whether it's the US Navy on the seabed or NASA on the lunar surface. Now, we have a lot of commercial relationships with companies there in the maritime sector and space, as mentioned, where we're working with Blue Origin and Intuitive Machines on our NASA contract. Even selling to them right now would still be selling to the government in a lot of ways because their end customer is largely the government. So I'd say the government is a really, really important player over the next 24 to 36 months as we really begin to, not just build these one-off, but really start to deploy them at scale. Now, what is great about our technology is that this nuclear battery that we're going to use to power a sensor on the seabed for the US government, that is the exact same technology that could be used to power deep sea mining operations in the Pacific, to support the protection of seabed infrastructure, offshore energy generation, in the space sector as well. The same system that we are building for NASA or the Space Force could very quickly be used if and when we see this commercial lunar economy really take off to provide power for helium-3 mining, to support ISRU, other ISRU operations, to support distributed, PNT, nodes on the lunar surface. So we have this really, great opportunity to use government funding, to use these government contracts to de-risk and deliver the first systems operationally in the maritime sector in space, begin to scale to deliver those, with real production contracts with the government, but take that exact same technology and start to really build out that commercial pipeline, those commercial sales as well. It's dual use is obviously a phrase that's, gained a lot of notoriety over the past handful of years. Yeah, I think one thing that I'll add is that selling to the government and selling to commercial customers are very, very different things. I think as startups, if you try to do both evenly, you can be set up for failure in a lot of fronts. So I think we've really taken the approach that the government is the beachhead market. We are positioning around that, but again, using that to really accelerate the entry into the commercial market as well in maritime and space, and again, longer term, more distributed applications.
Yeah. I want to take a step back and just look at the history of nuclear in the United States. You mentioned earlier how, these radioisotope batteries, they've been used in the past. These nuclear reactors, they've been used in the past. And, the US nuclear power in the 50s, 60s,
Oh yeah.
we had a bright future and it looked really good. What do you think really happened over the time frame of the spiral downwards of nuclear not coming into powering our infrastructure, the United States, the world really.
Yep.
and why we're now seeing see it resurface and the government getting more into it and, you know, people backing it.
Yeah, we could spend multiple hours digging into that question. It is a great one, and I'll try to give a succinct answer that tries to talk about fission and what we're doing with radioisotopes. Because for the most part, the technologies that you are seeing mature today, from advanced fission to radioisotopes, are using largely 1950s and 60s technologies. There are innovations, advanced materials properties, advanced fuel. We, of course, have much greater software that we can use to build faster. But the core physics behind these reactors and our technology are generally the same from the 50s and 60s. So, what happened in the 20th century and why are we seeing the resurgence today? First and foremost, and I'll start with radioisotopes. In the 1950s and 60s and 70s, we were being pushed by the Soviet Union. We saw great power competition in the world. This was forcing the United States to invest in going to the moon. This was enforcing us to invest in our maritime infrastructure, to invest in the Arctic, regions where nuclear batteries are a proven technology and a great way to power those operations. So we saw the broad deployment of nuclear batteries by the US Navy and the Air Force to power Arctic sensors and maritime buoys. We saw radioisotope power systems, nuclear batteries being used on every Apollo mission to leave behind for sensors and scientific payloads on the lunar surface so that we can have persistent data that is coming in. So this technology was broadly used. Now, what happened in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s? The fall of the Soviet Union, the US becoming the world's global unipower. And with that, we stopped exploring. We stopped going beyond low Earth orbit. We stopped exploring the oceans. There wasn't much strategic value to really look at the Arctic. So we stopped building and deploying the technology that we are building today. What has happened? Well, in the 2010s, where we are today, we are seeing these markets redevelop as great power competition rises against China. We once again are in a race back to the moon. We once again see the need to protect infrastructure and support operations on the seabed. Of course, we see the Arctic is a region of growing geopolitics. So the markets for nuclear batteries are resurging, and we are now here to fill that gap and build this technology that can enable the US, our allies, and our commercial companies to operate in these frontier regions. So I'd say from the nuclear battery side, it's largely markets. And we were seeing the markets redevelop that we saw exist in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and with that, the need for this technology. Now, on the fission front, it is a little more nuanced because fission wasn't always really pushed by great power competition. Nuclear was seen as this way to free energy that could power the grid. We saw great nuclear innovation and nuclear reactor deployments in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There were a couple of things that happened in the 1980s. First was Chernobyl, and with that, Three Mile Island in the United States, and you started to see oversight come over the nuclear industry. With that, the creation of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We also started to have other energy sources that became much cheaper, natural gas and others. And with that, you saw nuclear become, frankly, just too expensive and too slow. And that is what led to us stopping really building fission reactors in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s. What is changing today is really twofold. One is that we are seeing really, really high demand for 24/7, 365 resilient power sources, and that is largely coming from data centers. So you really can't underestimate the impact of that is bringing excitement for nuclear today. You are also seeing excitement for fission reactors in the same defense and aerospace ecosystems that I was speaking for nuclear, for protecting, military bases in the U.S. and internationally, for space operations. So you're seeing that same defense pull. So again, you're seeing really, really big market trends that are pulling fission, both commercial and government. But at the same time, over the past 1 year, you are also seeing massive government support for nuclear. And this is not just funding. Funding has come out for years in support of the nuclear industry. What you are seeing is a government that wants to support this industry move faster. And you are seeing that every bit of regulation is being re-examined, whether this is still necessary, whether it is outdated, whether it was too slow and too conservative. You are seeing a lot of what had historically been headwinds from the government really convert into tailwinds. So you're now seeing people move faster than ever. And because of that, you're also seeing way more private capital come into these markets because investors see the possibility of these technologies actually being built and deployed at scale and real commercial companies standing up. So again, from nuclear batteries to fission, I think that part of the trend and why you're seeing this resurgence is the markets. You're seeing at the larger scale this need for power for data centers, which is absolutely a massive tailwind for the industry. But you're also seeing these markets develop for nuclear in these frontier regions, in the seabed, in the Arctic, in space. And that is pushing forward the need for technologies from fission reactors to nuclear batteries. But at the same time, on the regulatory front, again, you are seeing the government want to work with industry to move faster and actually build and deploy technologies at scale. And with that shift from a government in some ways being a source of headwinds to also being a source of tailwinds, you're again seeing more private capital than ever that wants to pump into that space that is only accelerating it forward. And that positions us where we have an incredibly exciting next handful of years for the nuclear industry, where this year you're going to see fission reactors turned on. You're going to see nuclear batteries facilities being stood up. In 27, you're going to start seeing technologies deployed to power data centers, to power undersea infrastructure, to power landers on the lunar surface. And it is a exciting time for the industry where we now need to execute. The money is here, the customers are here, the regulatory paths are there. Industry needs to execute and deliver on what we've said that we can do. So
Yeah.
there's the trying to keep it somewhat succinct of the history of nuclear's ebbs and flows and the exciting place we see ourselves today.
Yeah. So things have like gotten back on track and are pushing in the right direction. I'm curious about the technology now with have there been technical breakthroughs with nuclear batteries over
Yeah.
in the past 10 years? And what are you most excited about in the next, 5 to 10 years of what we can see with nuclear batteries and new technical breakthroughs and milestones and things they'll be able to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the nuclear battery side, as mentioned, this is a proven technology, and there's been two flavor of radioisotopes fuel that historically been used for this technology, and that's plutonium-238 and strontium-90. In plutonium-238 is an isotope that NASA has used for every deep space spacecraft. So spacecrafts that have gone to Pluto, Saturn, Mars, the lunar surface have all used plutonium-238. It's a great isotope. It's easy to shield, so you can build nice lightweight systems. It has a long half-life, great thermal properties. It is also, unfortunately, one of the world's rarest, most expensive elements. So we can build roughly one of these systems per decade for hundreds of millions of dollars per unit. Now, that is fine when you're building a multi-billion-dollar probe that is going to Mars. Not a lot of broader usability. On the other side, strontium-90 is this available abundant waste product. It is a byproduct of the nuclear fuel cycle. 5 to 6% of all fissions and reactors produce strontium-90. So in what we call nuclear waste, there's a large amount of strontium-90. And largely in the 20th century, strontium-90 was separated from the rest of the waste because it's really hot. And if you could reduce this really hot isotope, it makes handling the rest of the waste easier. Because of that, there are large quantities of strontium-90 sitting around the United States, international as well, that again is just a liability. And because of that, over 1,000 strontium-90 nuclear batteries have been built before in more affordable manners. But historically, these have been very heavy boxes that required a lot of shielding, so they could be used for more niche government applications. And again, we had this thesis that these markets were renewing for this technology. And if we could build them in manners that they were affordable and lightweight and scalable, that could have a lot of broad usability from the seabed to the Arctic to the lunar surface. So the innovations that we have at Zeno are really in the heat source and the way that we convert this heat into electricity. So in the heat source, we have some innovations on the way that we're processing strontium-90, that we are shielding it so that we can have more compact strontium heat sources. We also are using what's called a Stirling engine to convert this heat into electricity. Historically, the technology has always used what's called thermoelectric generators to convert the heat into electricity, which are solid state devices that use the Seebeck effect that convert heat into electricity. So you have a really hot interior. You have the ambient environment that is relatively cold. You start to get a flow of electrons. These environments try to get into equilibrium, and you can capture that and convert this heat into electricity. A great technology, but you only get about 5% of that heat that is converted into electricity, so relatively low efficient. A Stirling engine, we now introduce moving pieces. We have a free moving piston, more technology development that is needed, but we can now get up to 20, 25, in the future, even 30% efficiency. So if you combine it now where we're using this waste product strontium and compact heat sources, and we have a more efficient way to convert this heat into electricity, as a whole, we can build nuclear batteries that use this available abundant waste product, but in more compact and lightweight packages, enabling broader use. So that is some of the innovation that we are bringing. Strontium-90 is largely the isotope that we'll use terrestrial and in the maritime sector, but we see opportunities in space as well. In the space sector, the isotope that we are really leaning forward on is one called americium-241. And americium is an isotope that has characteristics more similar to plutonium-238. So we can build more lightweight systems. It requires very little shielding, and it has the potential for a more robust supply chain, but it's not quite available today. So this is where last year we announced an exciting partnership with Orano, which is an organization in France that reprocesses all of France's nuclear waste. And we engaged with them to produce a really robust supply chain of americium-241 in the latter part of the decade that will allow us to use this isotope at relative scale and more compact, lightweight packages. So where we sit in the future is that we'll have our more efficient strontium-90 systems for terrestrial applications. We'll see americium as the space isotope to power spacecrafts for the U.S. Space Force, landers and rovers on the moon for NASA and commercial entities, our allied governments as well. And even longer term, the nuclear battery space, we see opportunities for other isotopes that can allow us to scale power up, that have longer half-lives, that allow us to really have a robust product line with different isotopes for different nuclear batteries to fill different market needs.
Yeah. And you mentioned about the supply chain of the nuclear waste. I'm a little curious about how that looks over the future with all these new nuclear programs going up, but maybe you could start a little earlier, breaking down what nuclear waste is. I know it can be an umbrella term sometimes and be
Yep.
applied to a lot of things, but what is nuclear waste like? What does it come out of? Like, what does it look like? Which ones
Yep.
are there and which ones do you need? And, what's the abundance of it? And are we going to see more or less with these advanced reactors?
Yep, absolutely. For that, we have to do nuclear reactor 101, and we'll build from there into what nuclear waste is and how we see value there. So the way a nuclear reactor works at a very high level is you have uranium, which is this relatively unstable material. You hit it with a neutron. When the neutron hits the relatively unstable uranium, it splits apart or it fissions. As it fissions, it produces a lot of heat. It also produces more neutrons. These neutrons hit more uranium, fissions, you get heat, you get neutrons. This is where you get a chain reaction where you start to generate a lot of heat. You take that heat, you boil water, you spin a turbine, you get electricity. There's also companies now trying to do it outside of boiling water, but a traditional reactor, you take that heat, boil water, you get electricity. Now, because of the way reactor economics work, when only about 5% of uranium has been fissioned, it makes more economical sense to take that core out and put in 100% fresh uranium. And again, as this uranium fissions, you get what are called byproducts. These are smaller isotopes, a lot of them relatively unstable and radioactive in producing heat. So in what we call nuclear waste, we have a lot of uranium. We also have a lot of these byproduct materials that have been fissioned, that are fission products when uranium splits apart. So in what we call nuclear waste, there is an incredible amount of potential energy. There is still a lot of uranium. There's a lot of energy in these byproduct material. Now, in the United States, we have a once through fuel cycle, which means we put uranium, put it in the core, we burn it up, we take it out, we have this waste, we sit it on concrete stacks in reactors around the country, and we just let it sit there. We have had endeavors in the past that try to have a single place where we put it all, Yucca Mountain, the one being most famous. That ended up falling through. So we just have casks of nuclear waste material sitting around the US. It is very safe. It is not a technical problem. It is totally fine that it is just sitting there. But right now, it is just sitting there. Meanwhile, in France, what they're doing is very different. In France, they take this waste material and they process it again, and they're able to get new fuel that can be used for nuclear reactors. You're also able to separate some of these byproduct material, these fission products, and use them as a source of value. So again, in these fission products, we have strontium-90, which can be used. There's other isotopes that can be used for other industrial and medical purposes. And that's where we've again been engaged with Orano in France about the opportunity to separate isotopes from this nuclear waste that's used nuclear fuel to show that we cannot just reuse it to build fuel for nuclear reactors, but we can get valuable isotopes that can be used for power, for cancer treatment and medical purposes, for industrial purposes. Now, what's changed over the past handful of years is that in the United States, you're once again seeing a lot of interest in recycling of nuclear waste to use nuclear fuel. So you have a handful of companies out there from Shine to Oklo to Curio. There was actually an announcement yesterday of 5 companies that got funding from the Department of Energy to really look into this. And that's where we've had a lot of great engagement with the Department of Energy, with congressional stakeholders, and with industrial stakeholders in the United States that are looking at recycling used nuclear fuel and saying, yes, we should recycle this because there's a lot of valuable fuel for nuclear reactors. There's actually enough potential energy in what we call nuclear waste in the United States to power the US for 300 years. So let's recycle it. Let's get the fuel for fission reactors. But at the same time, while we're recycling it, let's take out these fission products, these byproducts, and use these isotopes so that we can buy it and use the fuel for our power systems so that they can be used for other industrial and medical purposes and really build this robust ecosystem on the back end of the fuel cycle and have this more, resilient and reliable operations in the U.S. for how we handle nuclear waste today.
So policy and regulations, that's like the bottleneck. I mean, I I've seen, you know, closed down enrichment facilities with hundreds of these cement pods with nuclear waste in them, and they've been sitting there for years, a very long time. We
Yeah.
could, like, what's stopping someone from just saying, "All right, go grab two of them, let's crack it open and
Yeah.
get some
Um,
nuclear fuel to turn into these batteries."
Look, historically, it really is. It's policy and regulatory. I mean, there was policy in the United States that we cannot and we do not recycle, use nuclear waste. There are concerns of proliferation because in recycling, some methods to separate plutonium. So that has been a concern in the United States is proliferation. Now, there's companies today that have processes to do that in a way that never fully separates plutonium. So that's how you're starting to see some engagement there. So again, historically, it has been policy and regulatory challenges. Now, why are we not just doing it today, right? The government that said we want to do this, why is it not happening already? Why is it going to take a couple of years? And that is just, it is very large CapEx projects and, buildings, infrastructure that needs to be built to recycle this. So, it's not just cracking open the canister and saying great, let's recycle it. We need to build some really big infrastructure. Now again, what's exciting is that you are seeing Oklo, who's announced the multi-billion-dollar facility they intend to build in Tennessee to do this. You have Curio, you have Shine in Wisconsin that has massive infrastructure as well. So you're starting to see these investments come in now that the regulatory and policy hurdles have been removed, and again you see government support for this, but that's going to take a little bit of time. So it's not realistically going to be till the latter part of the decade, the 2030s, that we start to actually see recycling at scale. But it's exciting to see policy and regulatory reforms come down, government get behind it. And with that, again, private capital now coming in to finance the infrastructure that we need so that we can recycle in the US and have a more sustainable fuel cycle and also a lot more isotopes that can be used for a variety of applications.
Yeah. And as we're seeing the shift, more people getting on board with nuclear, and uranium especially, I've noticed sort of plutonium being kind of left behind, and people still scared of that. Should they be? What kind of place does plutonium have in the future compared to uranium?
Yeah, well, look, you see, there's an effort right now where there's a large amount of plutonium-241 that is at Savannah River in South Carolina. And DOE has released an RFP to entities saying, do you want to look at this? And Oklo is another company that's been very vocal about the fact that they could take this plutonium-241 and they could produce fuel for their fast reactors. So I think that you're starting to see some focus there. I'd say most of the attention on the fuel supply chain is still focused on, uranium-based fuels. HALEU, of course, being the one that a lot of these advanced reactors need. But, Oklo, for example, has stated that HALEU is going to take a little bit for us to get there. There's a lot of investments need to be made in infrastructure so that we can have reliable HALEU supply chains. But we are realistically looking until the 2030s to get there. So could some of these plutonium-241 material that's sitting there, could that be used to bridge the gap until we get to HALEU or others? So again, you're seeing some interest there, but largely still uranium is what is driving the fission industry. On the radioisotope side, a very different flavor of plutonium, plutonium-238, a very different material. It is still a great isotope that we are seeing used for all of NASA's marquee missions, but again, we're using different materials that are getting more available and abundant.
Got it. And where we are right now with this age of more AI and advanced manufacturing coming to the United States and nuclear policy being pushed forward, how does advanced manufacturing and AI and nuclear all sort of work in synergy of helping each other out and being able to help scale these entire industries?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic answer there is that data centers need massive, massive quantities of energy. Nuclear, if they could choose any source, is probably the best source again because of the baseload power that it can provide. So, I mean, what is AI showing right now for nuclear? It is a market. It is showing, not a government-only market, but a real commercial market for these technologies. Markets that have an insatiable need for energy and are willing to pay a premium for resiliency. That's also been one of the challenges of nuclear historically, is if you're in very competitive energy grids, nuclear has struggled there. But now that you are seeing this almost different layer of market develop where you have people willing to pay a premium for resiliency, that makes it a little easier for nuclear to really compete there. So again, I think that you're seeing AI show as a market that is again driving private capital into the industry so companies can build and deploy the nuclear technologies. There are certainly a lot of innovations in advanced manufacturing as well. Historically, where nuclear has really struggled is building things at scale. We do things one off. It takes a really long time. It's overly expensive. So looking to scale up manufacturing, a lot of modular approaches to scaling up manufacturing. That's largely approach behind, small modular reactors. Again, and I'd say it's one of the core things of a lot of the companies that are being built right now, including us in the nuclear battery side, is from day one focusing on the design of the technology to being one that it can be built at scale. Working to get the infrastructure early, working to focus on scaling up early, not just saying we want to build one and then figure out how to build 100. Rather focus on how are we going to build 100 and then let's build the first one there. And you're seeing that with a lot of the fission companies and with us as well.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this in space, and could there be a world where we see satellites without solar panels and they're just using these nuclear batteries?
Absolutely. That is the broader vision. And that is where we have some contract with the Space Force where we're working on that. You're looking at providing constant power without solar, so you can have more maneuverable satellites. You can have satellites with smaller radar cross sections. You have more resilient satellites. So absolutely. I'd say that solar is great. Even on a satellite like that, you would probably want on-body solar just to generate a little bit of electricity. But being able to get rid of deployable solar panels, there are a lot of benefits there.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this because in the past year, I've been hearing, oh, by 2030, we're going to have 50,000 satellites in orbit to
Sure.
100,000 satellites. I've heard people talking about in the 2030s having, 300,000 satellites. So as this scales so much and so fast, um, you know, a design transition from having solar panels to these batteries could be one of like the biggest, technological shifts we've seen in advanced, uh, just technology alone. What does that set you up for in terms of how big Xeno could be if
Yeah.
that's the case, even if just some of them start doing that? And you've already signed a lot of deals with governments, and I'm sure customers are getting interested in this too. What does it look like to scale up and be that new supplier of energy for satellites?
Yeah, look, I mean, and I'm going to take it in two places. I'm going to talk about, orbital satellites. I also want to go back to the moon and the, development of the lunar economy, because I'd say those are the two growth areas. Like for Xeno as a whole right now, the maritime sector is our near beachhead market with really large customers, government and commercial, that we're going to scale and build the company. In a lot of ways, that's kind of the base that most investors are underwriting the company on, is the maritime sector. The space sector is where there's a lot of really exciting opportunity for growth. And it's exactly what you just said. Right now, we are mostly looking at powering, more strategic satellites for the Space Force with increased capability. But again, as we drive our power up, price down, you see the need for proliferated satellites. There absolutely is a possibility this becomes a primary or secondary source in addition to solar on a lot of these satellites. And that again opens us up from being more of a niche application provider for orbital satellites to one that can be used at scale as we start to see the need. Now, on orbit, solar works relatively well, but as we see more unique orbits start to really come about, as you see the need for mobility as space gets more crowded, that's where there's absolutely a lot of interest that we are seeing in using this for more commercial applications. Lunar surface is a little different. Lunar surface is where nuclear is going to be the primary source for power for government commercial applications because of the challenge on the lunar surface. Again, where you're in lightness for 2 weeks and darkness for 2 weeks, and where a lot of the most valuable resources are in these permanently shadowed regions, these craters on the South Pole where we think that there are massive quantities of ice, but it is dark 24/7, 365. Again, making nuclear the power source that we need to be using for a variety of applications. Right now, we're looking at powering the hundreds of planned missions to the lunar surface in the coming decades with NASA, with our allies and governments, and in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, South Korea, India. A lot of commercial applications from Blue Origin, Intuitive Machines, and others. But what we're really excited about is the shift that we hope to see in the latter part of the decade into the 2030s, which is when you really see a commercial market develop on the lunar surface. Right now, going to the moon is largely backed up by the government, and that is largely for national prestige, for science, and national security. Now, there's a lot of companies that are working to actually develop commercial purposes to be on the moon. This could be companies like Interloon and others that are looking at helium-3 mining, finding resources on the moon that are so valuable, so there's a pure commercial reason to go there. This could be companies that are looking to create, rocket fuel on the moon using the ice there, separating, getting hydrogen that could be used to refuel satellites on orbit, which is a lot cheaper to do because of the low gravity on the moon and the lower cost of getting off the moon versus the very expensive price of getting on Earth because of our gravity. So again, looking at the moon as a place of refueling satellites on orbit or as a refueling space for spacecrafts that are going into deep space. There also could be space tourism. That could be a large enough reason to really commercially go to the moon so that people can go and stay in hotels on the lunar surface. And all to say is, right now, going to the moon is largely government backed. Our hope is that in the coming years, there'll start to be one, if not multiple, pure commercial reasons to go to the moon. And that is really crucial to unlock this resilient lunar economy, where it is not going to the moon as ebbs and flowed by politics, by different priorities of government. We are going there because we can make money. And when that happens, I think we're just going to see this balloon of operations on the lunar surface, and the opportunity for space nuclear is going to grow from being, yep, we're going to power 10, 20, 30, 100 missions in the coming decade to thousands of missions the coming decade that really unlocks the market for what we're building to be a incredibly massive opportunity.
Got it. Now I want to take it the other direction and go into the depths, deep sea
Yeah.
applications. What are some things in deep sea applications that are really scaling that are maybe new and people don't know about that's on the horizon and exciting? And I guess what's happening just right now that Zeno could really
Yeah.
offer a great solution to these companies when they need power deep underwater.
Yeah. We'll start on the government side and then the commercial as well. But the massive shift that we're seeing on government maritime operations is the shift towards autonomy. The shift from large, exquisite platforms where the US Navy is only centered on our aircraft carriers and our submarines, right? That is what has been the United States naval power for the past decades. You are starting to see the shift towards distributed autonomous platforms. And for the same reason that we're seeing drone warfare really come out in Ukraine and the need for, how small distributed systems, attritable assets can destroy large, exquisite platforms, we're seeing the same potential, really unfold in the maritime sector. And this is where you're seeing the shift towards autonomous undersea vehicles, Anduril, the shard towards autonomous surface vehicles, Saronic, and of course, a plethora of other companies that are operating in that space. And with that, you are seeing this growing need for distributed, persistent power to support these distributed autonomous applications. So this is looking at building charging stations on the seabed in the Pacific region so that autonomous platforms can go and recharge on the seabed in theater instead of coming back to a ship or a shore to recharge. This is looking at placing distributed sensors on the seabed so that we can track our adversaries' activities of both their submarines but also their autonomous platforms. This is distributed communication nodes so that our platforms can communicate with each other. And again, as we see this shift towards distributed autonomous operations, there's this need for persistent energy to enable that. And that is what is unlocking the massive opportunity for us to power the thousands of nodes on the seabed that we are seeing that are going to need to be powered in the coming years. So I'd say that's really on the government side. It's this shift towards autonomy, distributed operations that is building this massive market opportunity for persistent energy, which we can uniquely provide. Now, on the commercial side, you're seeing a couple shifts of new markets that are developing. One exciting one is deep sea mining. As we see this, crucial need for critical minerals and for onshoring our supply of critical minerals, there are a lot of critical minerals that are on the seabed, massive nodules of metal that are in the remote of remote regions in the Pacific Ocean. This is an industry that has been around for a handful of years, but has really been unlocked by an executive order from President Trump last year that is once again streamlining the licensing process to actually get approvals to get these minerals on the seabed. They are in the remote of remote region of the Pacific Ocean, no energy grids. Getting a ship there is very challenging. Being able to have persistent energy subsea to power navigation beacons, to power the autonomous platform so that they can do these operations 24/7, 365, that's a really exciting market for us. Seabed cables. We're seeing seabed cables and other infrastructure increasingly being threatened. Being able to have better domain awareness around these cables, having sensors, autonomous platforms that can alert people when the seabed cables that are being threatened, that can tell insurance companies what did happen if a seabed cable was cut so that they can ensure that they're not stuck with the costs there. That's another really increasingly exciting market for us. Again, as we're seeing seabed infrastructure and cables be threatened. So again, the maritime sector, we're seeing really, really large opportunities, both government and commercial. And once we deliver this first system on the seabed in 2027, we have the infrastructure now in place to scale very quickly to serve a lot of these customers in government and commercial markets.
Yeah. And just, all this demand, and now Zeno's right in the middle of it, and you guys are, fulfilling that demand. I'm curious, if a rival team had access to these isotopes and batteries
Yeah.
tomorrow, where would they still struggle to catch up with you?
Yeah, look, and the question there is really what is Zeno's moat? And we have IP. We have patents around the way that we are, manufacturing our heat sources, converting the heat into electricity, and the IP is great. That is valuable. The moat that we have is our supply chain, the infrastructure that we have, and the regulatory progress that we've made. That we have now locked down fuel and facilities to not just build these one-off, but build them at scale, and this is vertically integrated in the company. That we have regulatory progress and very soon the licenses that we need to build and deploy these technologies. These are timelines that can't necessarily just be compressed. And across the board, we really believe that does give us a multi-year head start in these markets in a massive moat largely around manufacturing. The fact that we are very soon going to build these at scale, that positions us uniquely in the marketplace. And really believes, gives us confidence that we can, really dominate and monopolize these markets, especially terrestrially. There's a little more competition in space with Americium. That's a market where we really do still believe that we are a leader, and hopefully soon once we deploy these, really solidify that. But on the terrestrial market, Strontium, maritime systems, we believe that we can really dominate those markets. In space, a little more competition, but still, think that we're in a really good place to be a leader in that sector.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess with this design, what is some of the non-obvious factors that come in, whether it's uh, manufacturing, the the way you scale these batteries. I'm thinking of the process, and I'm thinking you get these isotopes, you build these batteries, and they go off and they power things. I'm
Hmm.
sure there's a lot in the middle there that people don't see, that's under the hood,
Yeah.
that may sound boring, but it's actually a critical point, or something that really sets you apart. Can you tell
Yeah.
us about just, those non-obvious things that we're not seeing?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to that from day one, we have been built up as a company to build 1,000 nuclear batteries and deploy these, not trying to just build a couple. And that changes things from the beginning of how you look at building this company. I'll give a couple of examples of just small things. Yes, getting the fuel, having the facility in place, being able to build them and deploying them. That's kind of the basics. But there's a lot of things between the cracks that we've spent a lot of time on, to your point, aren't obvious. One is transportation. What are the NRC licensed casks that can transport the fuel to our facility, our heat sources to the port, or to the launch site to actually deploy these? Getting licenses for these casks can be a year. And if you're not thinking ahead of time, if you are not focusing on that, you can be in a place where you think you've done everything right, but you can't do these. And then let's ensure that we have the license, that it's not just a one-off license, we can do it at scale. Another one is some of the, policy challenges. Indemnification is an example. Indemnification is not a exciting opportunity to talk about. But where is the liability if there is an accident and there's a launch vehicle accident? When the government has launched nuclear technologies before, they've always had indemnification through what's called the Price-Anderson Act. This is a federal policy that DOE can use to indemnify nuclear accidents and nuclear operations, but it can only be used for government operations. So as we start to see commercial companies that want to start to launch nuclear power systems in the space, whether it's a nuclear battery or a fission reactor, we can't use Price-Anderson Act coverage to provide that indemnification. And right now, there are no commercial insurance offerings that will provide coverage to a space nuclear launch because there haven't been that many. They don't have the data to be able to underwrite that. So there's this gap right now of who will indemnify or provide insurance for these launches. There are opportunities through the Department of War and NASA through what's called Public Law 85804, which can provide indemnification for national security endeavors. But what if it's a pure commercial launch? So again, there's some, interesting policy hurdles as well that we've been focusing on for years. We've had great engagement recently, with the White House, with Congress to try to solve these issues. But yes, we've spent a lot of time getting fuel, getting facilities, building them, and soon deploying them. But there's a lot of these more, kind of edge challenges that, take up just as much time and are just as important.
Got it. If, say, tomorrow you were to get, basically unlimited funding or $1 billion to work with, and the government said, policy and regulations, you're immune from all of that. What's the game plan? What do you do?
We begin to mass build and mass deploy nuclear batteries. We believe that again, the demand for this is massive right now, especially in maritime and space sectors. We'd expand to the Arctic environments. As we get to scale, we would be able to again drive our power up, price down, and start to commercialize in more distributed energy applications. So we would really build the nuclear battery market to broadly deploy and power persistent operations anywhere on or off Earth where energy is needed. Now, for Zeno itself, nuclear batteries are where we are starting, but our ambition goes beyond that. For example, strontium-90, the fuel that we're using, it decays into material called the yttrium-90, which is valuable for cancer treatments. So we could look at expanding into medical isotopes. There's other areas where we'd look at horizontal expansion or certainly vertical integration as we scale up to grow into other business areas. One of the unique things that we have and we're offering to investors in building the company at Zeno, again, we are going to operationalize our nuclear facility this year, deploy our first systems in maritime and space sectors in 27, and 28 scale to $100+ million of revenue and profitability. So we have a near-term path to profitability in a relatively capital-efficient company, and that opens up a lot of opportunities to again scale faster, to expand into other areas. Which, yes, we bring in $1 billion. We certainly would look to do to really build Zeno as a platform and build up a much broader nuclear technology company that is founded on nuclear batteries but expands beyond that.
Uh, I see a question from the audience. Could these batteries pair well with a diesel hybrid setup, like Edison Motors use?
Again, I think that gets to depends where it is from a physics standpoint. Absolutely. We've looked at a lot of opportunities where this can be paired with, whether it is diesel engines for diesel generators for trucks. If it is solar power, so you use this in solar for regions where there is some solar. In a lot of scenarios, we look at just pairing this with energy storage, where we're just trickle charging a battery and you almost have this self-charging battery. Again, we sometimes don't have a massive amount of energy we're producing, but it's reliable energy for a really long time. So, absolutely would look at pairing it with other technologies. Again, vehicles is one that is, I think more of a future market. But there's no reason why the technology would not pair well there.
Yeah. So what kind of milestones should people keep their eyes out for of what you guys will do over the next, or I guess you talked about launching your next systems. Um, you just mentioned, you could scale into other revenue streams such as medical and cancer research. What I'm curious about is just, how far out can this really spread? Whether you're in medical, whether you start using this in commercial vehicles, whether this starts getting put into, just basic infrastructure of cities, their lights, the traffic lights, things like that. How far can this really scale? And is there anything on the horizon that you can hint at?
Yeah, what I can hint at, and I've hinted at a couple times, is that we will have some exciting announcements soon from infrastructure that we're bringing in house that allows us to really scale production. And that really is the answer to your other question. Historically, nuclear batteries has been thought of as this one-off niche technology. We are going to change that dynamic. We are going to show that nuclear batteries can be built at scale, that we can drive the price down to a place where this can be competitive in more broad energy markets. And that is really the key to unlocking that broader use for terrestrial infrastructure. Again, disaster relief, critical applications, power for houses where you can be off grid and have your house powered for a decade. That really does just get down to cost. Is this competitive with other energy sources, or will there be a place where people will pay that premium for resiliency? The key to cost for us is scaling production. And the fact that we are now going to bring the infrastructure in-house to do that is incredibly exciting. And it starts to build a vision for Zeno, not just for these frontier regions on the seabed, in the Arctic, on the surface of the moon and beyond, but starting to see nuclear batteries as a solution for energy needs in really distributed applications anywhere on or off Earth. So, where we want to go is, much more than just the seabed and the lunar surface. We're very confident in those markets. That is enough to build a really big business. But where we become a industry defining business, again, is by mass producing nuclear batteries for a variety of distributed applications. And again, looking at that horizontal expansion into other industries, using the infrastructure we have, using the contracts we have, using the revenue that we have as that foundation as a platform to scale. I think I saw a question, will you be using some other isotopes for medical use cases? That is absolutely on the roadmap as well. And with the infrastructure that we can bring in-house, the ability to utilize this to expand into other isotopes. Again, we try to balance being very narrowly focused on the work that we have to do over the next 2 years and then where Zeno could grow to the future. And for the next 2 years, we are very focused on building and delivering our first systems on the seabed in space and scaling from there. But absolutely with the infrastructure we have, we are excited about a wide set of medical applications in the future.
Got it. And as we wrap up, and people, they leave this Zoom, they end this recording. What is one of the biggest takeaways you want them to walk away with after listening to all of this?
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about nuclear energy for the past year, especially over the past handful of years. The next 2 years are when this is going to become real. This is when something that has been talked about, that has been hyped about, is going to become real. As we actually build and deploy commercial nuclear technologies, as we see fission reactors go online this year, and that is going to completely change the game. I'd say that there is still, even though there's so much excitement for the industry right now, there is still healthy skepticism from people that have said, we've seen this excitement for nuclear before and nothing gets built. So industry needs to prove that this time around it is different, that the tailwinds from commercial markets, from government markets, the regulatory reforms that have been made, the fact that we now have fast-moving startups in this space, this is a different time around for the nuclear industry. The next 2 years is when this is going to become real, and that is going to also change everything because that is when you're not going to have the naysayers who saying this, this can't be done, and people are going to be, I think, amazed by the technology deployed, the opportunities that are unlocked, and then, from there, the sky's the limit for Zeno, for the industry as a whole, and we're right in the middle of it, and at this again incredibly exciting point in an exciting next 2 years where we need to prove ourselves.
Awesome. Love it. Well, Tyler, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This was a very fun conversation, and I can speak for myself and hopefully everyone else, but this is very exciting what you're doing, and I think we're in the most amazing time for this industry. And thank you for sharing all that today with us.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Aidan.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Take care.